Okie doke. We left off. Oh, that's right. Pinmai and Yishan were escaping with Lady Meng, and that older woman who has a scarred face let them into her house and then lied to the soldier. Um, and then at the end of the chapter, she turns to them and says, Now, what? Now, how should we take care of you? Chapter 40. Certainly seems like she's going to be a friend. I think food first, said the woman with a smile. Come. She led them through another gate into the inner courtyard and past the side hall, her finger pressed to her lips for silence. Despite her size, she walked noiselessly, and they followed her to the kitchen. The warmth of the room made them stumble as if they were wading in honey. She led them to the stove and began to spoon rice porridge into bowls, its steam issuing like a sighing breath. Eat, the woman said, holding out a bowl, her large fingers almost completely hiding the design of a painted monkey. Thank you, Lady Meng said, taking it. It matters not, said the woman, pressing another bowl towards Yishan. But, Pinmai said, as the woman held out a third bowl. The rich smell of porridge was intoxicating, and its hot mist made a translucent cloud around the woman, softening her many scars. Who are you? Pinmai said. The woman laughed. Ho! Now me, I'm just a servant in the house of Wu, she said. It's of no importance, I assure you. Oh, your masters must be very kind, Lady Meng said. The woman laughed again. Oh, no, definitely not, she said. They are quite the opposite, in fact. Then, Pinmai said, won't she get in trouble? Most probably, the woman said, nodding. But Pinmai hesitated as Yishan gave her a pointed look. She didn't want to be cast out, but she needed to understand. Why are you helping us? She asked. The woman looked at Pinmai, smiled sadly, and lifted the lantern up to her face. Do you know what kind of scars these are? The woman asked her. With the light on them, Pinmai could see they were all shaped like small, sharp slivers all over her face. Are they, Pinmai said slowly, almost in disbelief, scars of stingy rice? Yep, the old woman said, nodding. You must know the story. What is the story? Lady Meng said, looking from Pinmai to the woman. I'm no good at storytelling, the old woman said, and looked at Pinmai. You tell it. The story of the scars of stingy rice. There was once a rich lord who had always been wealthy. Perhaps one reason he had so much money was because he never gave anything to the poor. During times of famine or drought, he never gave even one spoonful of rice to a starving child, even though his jars were overflowing with grains. In fact, he flaunted his fortune. Every day, equally wealthy friends were invited to dine on jade tree chicken and silk squash noodles, while the hungry stood outside on the street by his house. When the rich lord turned 60, he decided he would throw his most lavish banquet. Man, what kind of person is he? Kind of greedy, huh? Clearly he doesn't feel a lot of compassion for people who are hungry. I have seen the year of the monkey 5 times, the Lord said with pride. I shall have a celebration to match such an auspicious event. So he ordered the slaughter of a half-dozen pigs and a flock of ducks, and he arranged for the most luxurious long life robe to be made for himself. As he inspected the fabrics, a blue silk pleased him so much he decided not only to have a robe made out of it, but also to use the line to use it to line the road to his house. Can you imagine? Somebody put silk on the side of the road to line the road. It will be a fitting pathway to my home, he thought. However, the road outside the house was not in very good condition, and the delicate silk wrinkled over the many cracks and holes in the street. This will not do, the Lord roared, and he commanded his servants to even out the road by filling the gaps with uncooked rice. But, your master, won't people try to take the rice? A servant protested. Have anyone who tries to steal rice immediately arrested, the Lord growled. No beggar is to steal even a single grain. So, the servants did as they were told, to the horrified awe of people on the street. More than once, hungry beggars attempted to grab a handful of rice, but the Lord's servants promptly had them thrown into jail. When the servants finished their work, and the silk lay smoothly on the road, an old man came walking down it, leaning on a stick. As he walked, the grains of rice made a crunching noise under his feet. Crunch, 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 crunch. He stopped in front of the Lord's house, raising his head to breathe in the delicious smells of the upcoming banquet. A treasured duck, the old man murmured to himself, licking his lips as if he were tasting the savory flavors. Lion's head, pork meatballs. Away from here, a servant cried. Get away! Please, the old man said, stretching out an arm. Your master's having a grand feast. Surely you can just spare a small bit for me? Go, the servant yelled, waving a stick. Perhaps, the old man said, perhaps I could just take a few grains of this rice then? And the old man reached down and plucked some rice from underneath the silk on the road. Thief! The servant bellowed, calling for the others. Thief! Thief! With the other servants came the lord of the house, who was furious to be called away from his party. You worthless body, the Lord screeched. How dare you try to steal from me? He turned to his servants. Beat him until every part of him is bruised and broken. So the servants lifted their sticks. But instead of cowering, the old man stood calmly. The servants hesitated, but the Lord snapped angrily. Do as I say, now! So they began striking him. The old man remained unmoved, but after the first few blows, the Lord began to howl with pain. Stop! He cried. Stop! For each time they hit the old man, it was the Lord who felt the blow. He collapsed, whimpering on the ground. The old man continued to stand. Goodbye, he said to the stunned crowds. I cannot say that I enjoyed your company very much, but I shall leave you something to remember me by. He walked down the silk pathway. When he reached the end of the silk, he turned to look at the staring servants and the sniveling lord, and he bent down. Then, as if breathing out a cloud, he blew. And the silk lifted and waved, and the hundreds and thousands of grains of rice rose into the air. They whipped up into the sky and flew toward the Lord and his servant like a swarm of mosquitoes. They cringed, but the rice fell upon them without mercy, melting into their skin. Immediately, their faces and bodies were covered with hundreds of white scars, all shaped like the grains of rice that had rained upon them. They shouted in dismay and shock and looked for the old man. But the old man was nowhere in sight. Unlike the scars, he had faded away and was never seen again. And that is the story of the scars of stingy rice. Yes, yes, the woman said. It was just like that. The old story has been whispered down through the house of Wu for generations, but none believed it happened, or if it did, that it could happen again. But it did, and almost the exact same way, except it was my mistress, and she had silk the green color of jade. She shook her head. How they love their jade. Mm-mm. Then, did you, Pinmai faltered. The scarred woman sat down heavily, looked at her empty hands, her bell-shaped figure an iron shadow in the light of the lantern. I was named after a great hero, she said softly. And I always wanted to be a great hero. Back then, it kind of seemed like I was. For I was as mighty as any man, and just as proud. The fire in the cook stove flickered and wavered, making noises like the opening of a crumpled paper. Outside, the black sky began to thin. But that was only on the outside, the scarred woman said, her huge shoulders slumping. Inside, I was weak and cowardly. I was too scared not to follow the commands of my masters. And I'll admit it, I beat the beggar. The woman lifted her head. Night was fading, and faint gauze ribbons of light stretched through the window toward them. When I heard you calling for help, she said, putting her hand on Pinmai's cheek, I knew this was a chance to make amends for what I've done wrong. I couldn't be a coward again. You have thanked me, but in fact it is I who should thank you. Outside, the sun rose, and the soft light streamed in. The gray glow of morning did nothing to disguise the scars on the woman's face, but they could see a gentle look in her eyes. Pinmai felt tears beginning to sting. The woman's hands were warm and wrinkled. The woman's hands were warm and wrinkled, touching hers with a tenderness that felt so much like a ma's. You are tired, the woman said. Come on, let's rest. Pinmai let herself be led to a large pillow next to the stove, its heat bathing her in warmth. Her weary legs and arms were limp and all but collapsed onto the padding. Who is the hero you were named after? Pinmai asked, her eyes already beginning to close. The great Hai, the woman said. He was one of my ancestors. But he, Pinmai began, but a yawn interrupted her words. Ugh. Shh, the woman said. It matters not. Pinmai's words and fears melted in the warmth of the woman's kindness, and she didn't try to say anything more. She was so tired. Now, the woman said, just rest. So, Pinmai did. All right, chapter 41. We're back to our black tortoise with the text in italics. And from what I can tell, it seems like these chapters are from the mind of the black tortoise, but we're not sure about when it's taking place. Who should he call? He didn't know if he was in the sky, the earth, or the sea. And it didn't really matter. Whomever he called, someone would come. But before this, he had last been swimming in the lake. So he would call the Sea King. But how? How could he reach him? No one had heard his cries. However, even to his own ears, his bellows seemed muffled. Perhaps outside this golden emptiness, his sounds were stifled to complete silence. He would have to send a message directly. The black tortoise hesitated. Was this the only way? It would not hurt him, and he would heal immediately, he knew, but it was still so unpleasant. He looked around again and saw only the bare brilliance. He twisted his arms and legs, feeling the emptiness. Yes, it was the only way. Very well. He stuck out his tongue, stretching it as long as he could. And then, with a powerful snap, he bit off his tongue with his own teeth. His tongue fell onto the gold ground, only to bound back up as if springing from a cushion. It began to roll and twist, lengthening and thinning, until it looked like a long black cord knotted at one end. Finally, it made a sinuous curve toward him, the bulbous knot resembling a head. The black tortoise blew on it. A calm, controlled gust of air. The black coil trembled. From its knotted head, 2 eyes opened. Something tiny like a frayed string flicked from his mouth. His tongue had turned into a snake. Chapter 42. What is that? Who is that? A sharp voice shouted. Pinmai woke up as if she had been slapped. She opened her eyes and saw Hai, the servant, cringing in the corner, and 2 richly dressed figures standing over her. As one of them, a puny man, heaped with lavish fur and silk, turned to glare at her, Pinmai could see that they were both as scarred as the servant. Their opulent clothing, elaborate and glittering, could not hide their disfigurement, and their unpleasant expressions made them look hideous. Pinmai knew immediately that these were the masters of the House of Wu. You're always helping little beggars to our property, screeched the other of them, the woman, as ornate gold pins in her hair shook. She threw a bowl at the servant. It broke against the wall next to Hai's head, the cold soup splashing everywhere. Rice porridge, dumplings, I've seen you. I've only given my portion, Hai protested, not even bothering to wipe the liquid from her face. And now you even let them into our house, shrieked the man, grabbing the broomstick leaning against the wall. He raised it wickedly, his silk sleeve falling to reveal his hairy, wiry arm. How dare you? No, please, master, Hai begged, cowering. Please. But before the man could lower the stick, Pinmai rushed forward. Stop! She screamed, placing herself between the man and Hai. Stop it! The man sputtered in shock and outrage, and Pinmai could only stare back. He looked more like an animal than a man. His rough-skinned face was purple with rage, and the veins in his eyes bulged like tiny worms. Pinmai paled, but she didn't move. "You want a taste of this stick too, you little beggar?" the man sneered, spitting drops of saliva. "I'm not a beggar," Pinmai said, raising her voice to hide its quivering. Without thinking, she took the jade bracelet off her arm and held it up. The green circle seemed to glow, vibrant and clear. The sunlight glided through it, making an emerald ring of light on the wall. Even from a distance, all could see the bracelet's exquisite beauty, and for a moment were stunned into silence. Yishan and Lady Meng, awakened by the noise, came in from the other room, but Pinmai barely saw them. Her eyes were fixed on the masters of the House of Wu. Their heads looked small, sticking out of their extravagant fur collars, but their mouths were wide open. Their expressions shifted, and Pinmai watched their shock transform into desire. The woman's eyes glittered like black beetles in her ravaged face, and the man licked his lips as if hungry. Pinmai swallowed. "Do you want this?" Pinmai said, holding the bracelet higher. The polished stone glinted, and Pinmai felt as if she were offering a treat to rabid dogs. "Then promise you will never hit her again, and you'll leave us alone." Almost panting with greed, the two quickly nodded, and Pinmai slowly held out the jade bracelet. They pounced toward her, and Pinmai suddenly felt a sharp, sad pain in her chest. How often had she clung to this bracelet? The jade was so pure and so clear, like Ama's voice waking her in the morning. And the cool, strong stone, like Ama's hand steadying her across the ice. Could she really let these beasts have it? Her hand tightened around the bracelet, and its perfect circle pressed back into her fingers as if resisting. Ama would want me to, Pinmai thought. She closed her eyes and released the bracelet. The couple clutched it together, pushing each other away to examine it closer. Pinmai turned away. She knelt beside Hai, reaching into her sleeve, and gave the scarred servant her handkerchief to wipe the spilled soup from her face. Yishan and Lady Meng quickly joined them. "Pinmai, you," Yishan said to her with admiration, "you were really great." "Was I?" Pinmai said faintly, and she found that she was shaking. I didn't think, I just wanted them to stop. Oh, I'm sorry you gave away your bracelet, Lady Meng said, looking in distaste at the masters of the House of Wu. They were inspecting the bracelet at the window, the man biting into it to test the stone. "You are a brave girl," Hai said, lifting her face from the cloth. "Much braver than..." The other three gasped. Hai stopped at the sound and saw they were staring at her. Your face," Pinmai breathed. "Your scars, they're gone." It was true. The raised white scars had disappeared. Instead, the woman's face was as smooth as the inside of a seashell. "My scars?" Hai said, and her fingers stroked the even skin on her face in disbelief. She opened her other hand, and from Pinmai's handkerchief, hundreds of rice grains fell onto the floor like a sudden rain shower. But it wasn't Pinmai's handkerchief. Pinmai cried out in astonishment. It was the paper of answers. Good timing, Coco, because that's where we stop for today.